Charlie Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This is episode 200, which, as I think I said when we hit episode 100, is only a big deal to the people making a show like this. Like, nobody else cares. It's like I shot heroin for the 200th time, if it were as cheap as shooting heroin. But there are two things that tend to happen when podcasts, TV shows, radio programs, when any kind of long-running series gets up into the big round numbers. Two things tend to happen. One is that they do clip shows, they do retrospectives, they take you back to earlier episodes rather than coming up with something that will actually be entertaining to hear. You get to be reminded of times you used to be entertained. So that's one thing that happens. The other thing that happens is that they tend to, if they have not already, get bad. Like shows that run for a while either were always bad, sometimes go through a brief period of being good, or they start good and then they get bad. So my hope is that we can avoid both of these fates. But I did have an idea for this episode that is not a clip show. It is not a retrospective. It's not an AMA like Elijah and Alice have done. That's Elijah Blumoff of Versecraft and Alice Allen of Poetry Says, and SLEERICKETS, I should say. If you're a new listener, this may be a weird one to start with. Welcome. We have had a lot of new listeners recently. Well, you were very welcome. Glad to have you here. This may be an odd one to start with. So here's my idea. So I recommended to my friend Ryan, when we were in college, I read The Secret History, the Donna Tartt novel, and I loved it. And so I told him he had to read it. I think I lent him my copy, and he read it. I told him it reminded me of him. And he read it, and if you know The Secret History, he loved the book, but he said he was really depressed because he recognized the character that I thought was like him in the book, and it was sort of a terrible character. This is, if you've read The Secret History, he thought I was comparing him to Bunny, and of course I wasn't. I was thinking of him as Henry. So these are radically different characters. Bunny is thoroughly dissipated and spineless and self-serving, and Henry is stoic and noble and learned. But it was just one of many examples I've encountered of people not seeing themselves the same way others do. I certainly have gone through that myself a few times. I think also of the poor kid at the end of Araby, which feels like a microcosm of my entire childhood and adolescence, and maybe all of my 20s as well. But here's my thought. In an effort to make this podcast keep going and not be shitty, I thought I would attempt to describe what it is. Like what this thing we are doing is, as I understand it. And maybe talk a little bit about like some of the things I feel like we're better at, worse at, like doing more or less, hope to do more or less. And then my hope is that some of you can let me know how accurate you think this self-description is. I'm less looking for compliments here, though compliments are welcome, than I am a sense of, maybe I would just like to get a little bit of a better sense of what we're doing, what we might do well or poorly, and what we might try to keep doing or do more or less. One thing I definitely want to keep doing, at least for a little while, is listener crits. I did a couple of them as a solo thing a couple weeks ago, and people really responded to them, both the listeners whose work was critiqued and other people. So we are, Alice and I are going to be recording another one coming up. We've got some subscriber poems to talk about there. For the time being, we'll see we'll see what, I don't want the whole show to become listener crits. I don't think it's in danger of that. But I would like this to be a semi-regular thing, and there does seem to be enough interest in it. So if you are a Secret Show subscriber and you would like to have us speak frankly and anonymously about a poem of yours on the show, on the main feed, send it in a poem. If you'd like to send in a poem and you're not a Secret Show subscriber, join the Secret Show. Go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Put your email address and you'll get a week's access for free. You can see all 49, I think, episodes that are up now, including the last one, which I was not, I tried to make them all good, but the last Secret Show episode was not planned. I did not put an enormous amount of preparation into it, but boy, I got a lot of response to it right away. Most of it very good. One reminded me that it is still possible for me to completely lose my temper on a piece of correspondence, which I might talk about a little bit on The Secret Show. Not here, because what I want to talk about here is what we're doing, what this thing is. I thought I could start with the title. Now, if you don't already know, I did mention this ages ago, I think in the first AMA. The title SLEERICKETS is a corruption of the word secrets, which my 2-year-old daughter was not at the time able to pronounce. So she would instead say she would say something like slurkets. And I stretched that out and gave it a standardized spelling for the sake of the podcast. But I chose this title for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted something stupid. That is, I think it's in a Harold Pinter play. I remember in college reading, there's a reference to the choice to get a neck tattoo. That is in like the in the criminal circles that a lot of the characters in Pinter's plays tend to wander through. There was an understanding that if you got a tattoo on your neck above the collar, you were demonstrating that you could never have a straight job, right? Nobody would hire you to work for them with a tattoo that was visible above the collar of your shirt. It was a way to stamp yourself and to say, I'm in this for life. I'm a criminal for life. I'm never going to have a straight job. And I had another title or two in mind before I went with SLEERICKETS, but I wanted something that was I didn't want it to be the Poetry Hour. I didn't want it to be, as I think Versecraft is an excellent title. I think it's a very well chosen, elegant, accurate, descriptive title. I think it does a very good job of identifying what Elijah's doing with that show, which is a totally different kind of show and one I very much respect. I wanted a neck tattoo. I wanted a title that was going to make clear that we would never have a straight job here. I was also sort of hoping that after maybe a few years, it would acquire some of the aura of institutionality, or at least it would begin to feel a little less stupid, and it would not so much sound like a ridiculous joke or a child word every time that I said it. But it doesn't. It still sounds just as ridiculous as it did in 2021. So failed in that respect. But I wanted a silly word. I wanted a word that was not respectable. And I wanted a word that was Googleable, which it is, thankfully. I still don't think there's any other SLEERICKETS online. But I also didn't want to put poetry in the title. This turns out to be, strategically speaking, a terrible choice. It is impossible to find this podcast on any of your podcast apps if you don't already know the title of it, because it doesn't have poetry in the name. So that was a huge SEO mistake. But I didn't want poetry in the name, partly because I didn't want to exclusively lock myself into speaking about poetry. What we speak about on the show is something I want to get to in a minute. But first, one of the things the show has become that I did not expect is a community of sorts. There are listeners who write in. There are people I've gotten to know. Alice and Cameron started as listeners. I know Brian from way back, but he was very early on, like a very enthusiastic and supportive listener who, gave me lots of really helpful feedback. And I cajoled him into joining up. But there's still I have correspondence with lots of people because of this show. And I think, I've been able to connect some people with one another. The Substack chat is not super active, but it's, I try to keep it active enough as a way for people to post news, interesting opportunities. I try to put in anything I know about that I can pass along to listeners, contests, reading periods, jobs, etc. We've, some of us have managed to meet up in New York, in Cleveland, and other places. I haven't been at all of these places, but it's been one of the real pleasures of the show has been both getting to know people I didn't know before, and also seeing people get to appreciate others I already loved. Like Alice and Jonathan have become friends, which is sort of wonderful and like unexpected, but it makes perfect sense in retrospect because they are both such like sweet and quietly cynical people who are really good. Like they're really good-hearted in a way that I'm not. So I don't totally know how to account for the show as a community. It feels hokey to say the show has become a community. Alice made a joke on Mike about a SLEERICKETS conference and down the road, it's, but it's sort of become less of a joke. As there's been a little bit of talk off mic about what, something vaguely shaped like that might look like. One thing that is very clear, if nothing else is clear about any SLEERICKETS conference-like event in the future, is that based on everything that Alice and I learned during our Shark Week episodes, if you want to run a poetry conference, a literary conference, what you really need is a good-hearted, strong woman in charge. And Alice had to remind me that one of her recent jobs was literally organizing a conference. So I think we've got our man there, we've got our woman there, if and when we can get something going. But in line with the stupidity of the title, one of the things I kind of wanted to aim for from the beginning was to make the appeal of this show pleasure. Like I wanted this to be enjoyable to listen to, not good for you. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I've listened to podcasts longer than most people have. There are definitely some people who are into it way before I was. Joanna, my wife, was into podcasts long before I was. But I started listening to Radio Lab back in 2007, I think. Yeah, I'm a fairly Catholic listener to podcasts. I've put in a lot of time as a consumer of them, and there are podcasts I listen to, or there are podcasts I thought about it this way. There's what I download, and then there's what I listen to. I download a lot, or I subscribe to a fair amount, and then I'll download individual episodes. But then I also try to pay close attention to what I end up actually listening to. And there's a balance, I think, because the utterly stupid, like the basically funny podcasts that are pretty much without fiber or substance, I do listen to a fair amount of that. It's hard when there's no fiber. It's hard when there's no substance. It tends to have a little bit of a limited appeal over time, but also boy, are there some probably very smart and impressive, boring recordings that have been sitting on my phone for years that I have not listened to and maybe never will. And at least when I started this show, that was where most poetry podcasts tended to live in my phone. They lived in the dutifully downloaded, seldom enjoyed segment. They stacked up as other shows got consumed the day they were released. So I didn't want this show to be a dutiful download. I wanted it to be a guilty listen, but one that was actually fun, right? Like pure cotton candy, pure Lucky Charms. It's hard to take very much of that. I need a little something. It's not that I need it to be a little bit good for me. It's just that I need it to have something I can actually chew up with my molars. So that's sort of what I've aimed for. I've wanted this to be one of the slogans in my mind as I've been making the show, as I think I mentioned to Ethan, was never get respectable. But another one of the slogans was a dumb show for smart people. And that is, I think, pretty true to what I've tried to do. It's a dumb show for smart people. I don't delude myself that I or anybody else here, except maybe Brian, is like a deeply, objectively out in the world funny person. But the goal is to speak in an engrossing and entertaining way about things that are maybe interesting to nerds, and nerds of a certain type. I have since learned, since starting the show, that like a lot of people download and even listen to podcasts out of a sense of duty or out of a sense that they are improving themselves. And that even if you tell people that they are improving themselves, that actually works pretty well. Like, that is a lot of what people want to consume. They want to feel like they are improving themselves. This is like middle-aged white men who want to feel like they are learning real facts, and that's why they don't read fiction anymore. They only read about the American Civil War because it really happened. So again, probably a misstep on my part to openly say that I'm not trying to improve anybody with this show. But it is honest. I'm not trying to improve anybody with this show. I am just trying to do things that are interesting to me and that I would find interesting. Though if we announced that we were providing a service, probably we would be more successful. I also knew from the beginning that I didn't want to do straight ahead interviews. I actually didn't know how much of the show would be just me or what. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I tried to cajole a couple people into hosting it with me to begin with. Didn't have any luck. But, I figured I would be talking to some people at some point. And I knew I did not want to do interviews. Most poetry podcasts are either readings or interviews or both. And I tend to find that kind of boring. We read poems on here. We do. I'm going to read some poems later in this episode. But just reading poems, I think, in a soulful, breathy manner and humming with satisfaction at having enriched one's soul, it just makes for a bad listen. I just don't think it's fun to listen to. And I wanted something that was fun to listen to. So my hope, and what has made it difficult at times to book the more prominent poets I've reached out to, is that I and not just poets, but I don't really want to interview people about their books. I don't want to interview people about their lives. I don't want to just invite them to read their poems and talk about them. I want, generally speaking, to bring in a third-party topic, even if that third party is, as with Stephanie Uduhem, something they've written about a third thing, about something else, not just about their own work. That's something I've tried to stick to. It's not always exactly the case. I recorded, I think, a terrific conversation with Brad Lighthouser I'm going to be putting out next week. That is, he's like brilliant. I mean, he's literally a MacArthur genius. He's MacArthur genius number 2 to appear on the show. He's also very autistic in a way that I recognize, and so I didn't I didn't quite have the nerve to tell him to come up with a third-party topic, but he's just good. He can just talk about anything. So I did bring him in. We talked some about his book. We talked about chess. What we talked about in that episode, I think you will really like, especially those of you who are sort of hoping to publish a book. It turned out to be not at all what I expected. But maybe that means I should do more straight-ahead interviews. I don't know. I have really resisted that, and I've sort of gone out of my way to do extra work to avoid doing conventional interviews, because it's felt to me like that's part of the character of the show. Like, I had so much respect for the Very Bad Wizards guys when they had on Ted Chiang, who's not only like a brilliant, wonderful writer, but also like a writer they specifically revere. And they asked him to talk about a video game, not his own brilliant writing. I had a lot of respect for them for that. And I feel like that's what I want to do here. Maybe wrongly. Maybe that's a huge mistake. Again, you can feel free to let me know. I had an inkling when I started the show, but I really, really learned over the course of the last couple years, it's been more than a couple of years, a couple hundred episodes, that there's a big difference between writing and talking. This is, by the way, 200 main feed episodes. If we were counting Secret Show, it's like 350, but 200 main feed episodes. There's a big difference between talking and writing. A lot of good writers are bad talkers, and vice versa. By the way, an example of vice versa. Alice put out a really good piece in the Sydney Review of Books, and it's about Australian poetry, about doing poetry says, about the trouble with poetry reviews. It's substantial, and it's like well researched, and she put an enormous amount of work into it. It was inspired by an episode she did, but she did a lot of work on it. She said she spent like 18 months writing it. And I believe it. Here's the thing. When you read that piece, Alice sounds like Alice. She just sounds like she's talking. It's the same with her Tar River essay, which is wonderful, in which I sent to a senior, highly accomplished poet who wanted to write about something similar. I sent this person Alice's Tar River poetry essay, and it intimidated the senior writer who was like, oh shit, I can't write about this now because she did too good a job. When Alice writes prose, it just sounds like she's talking. It just feels effortless. It's not effortless. It turns out it is really hard to do that. Most people are really not good at that. It's not just that most people are not good at speaking extemporaneously on mic. They're also not good at writing in a way that feels conversational and inviting and easy to read. Alice sounds like Alice in that piece. It is also, however, a conversation with James Zhang, who appeared on Poetry Says a couple times and was great. He's an Australian critic. I loved the episodes he appeared on Poetry Says. He was one of my favorite guests she's had on. He's great, and he is smart, and he's like worth listening to, worth reading. However, boy, in the exchange between the two of them, you can tell how stiff he is. And I think it's just because he's like normal stiff. He's just like trying to write about poetry in a sort of like as a normal person with a normal person's level of skill in doing this. And it just demonstrates how steady and confident Alice's hand is as a talker and as a writer at this point. It is not easy. It is not universal. It takes practice. But I've gotten a better sense of maybe how to approach the question of talking to somebody who isn't necessarily going to be. I've gotten a better sense of how to maybe feel that out a little bit, and I've also gotten better at editing. So there are let me tell you, there are some interviews I've done, some conversations I've done that are the number of edits per minute has been high. There's some really brilliant and otherwise fairly eloquent poetry-related speakers whose speech is so peppered with various non-word noises that it's heroic work on my part to edit it. But I'm grateful, of course, for them as well. So here's what I thought I might do. I want to see what kind of time we're looking at, because I have a couple of thoughts, and I don't know how much we're going to be able to get to. But I wrote down 10 subjects, and I wrote them down in an order. But basically what I did was identify sort of 3 categories of subjects that come up on the show. One is the mandate. Like, what the fuck is this? What are we doing? And the mandate subject is poetry. And I include in that POBIZ, publishing, criticism, editing, the academy, writing life, all of this stuff, as well as, actual poems. So poetry, I think, encompasses all of that. That, to me, feels like the mandate, the whole main big thing, the function of the show. If you look it up online, it will say SLEERICKETS Poetry Podcast. That's the premise of the show, basically, even if it's not in the title. Poetry's the mandate. And then after the mandate, there's what I call the wheelhouse, which is not the... maybe wheelhouse should have been poetry, but I'm thinking of this not as something I that's the sort of the main subject of the show, but areas that I feel comfortable, confident talking about, enjoy talking about, and I feel a minimal level of bashfulness bringing them up on the show, right? I feel like little to no need to apologize or do a disclaimer when I talk about these subjects on the show, because they feel like they're sort of, I mean, honestly, maybe inaccurately, maybe incorrectly do I not feel bashful when I bring these things up, but they feel like they are sort of close enough to where the show started, where like in the first few episodes, what it was doing, what it was getting at, that it seems reasonable enough if you're listening to this show for me to be talking about these things. So if the mandate is poetry and all that entails, the wheelhouse includes fiction, child rearing, psychology, and philosophy. little bit of a curve there, but I was just trying to write, like, honestly, like, what kind of stuff does it feel normal and natural to me to talk about? I think it was like in the first 5 episodes that I was talking about Freud. So, you know, for good or ill, and maybe just because my child gave the show its title, it seems reasonable to talk about child rearing. And of course, Brian, right? One of the co-hosts of the show isn't even a poet or particularly interested in poetry. He's a novelist. He reads a shit ton of fiction. He's great at talking about fiction. He can occasionally tolerate some poetry, but fiction and child rearing are a lot of what Brian and I talk about, and I always enjoy both. So that was the wheelhouse. The mandate's poetry. The wheelhouse is fiction, child rearing, psychology, and philosophy. And then the specials. The specials is what my daughters call their classes that are not their normal core class, like the classes that rotate. I think like art, music, PE. What do they call not ELS? SEL, social emotional learning, and Spanish, which should be Spanish should not be a special. Spanish should not be something they do once a week, but oh well. They call these specials. They do them regularly, but in kind of a rotating intervals. So the special topics are those I'm interested in all of these. Really, the truth is, like, I'm interested in all of these. I enjoy talking about all of these. But the special topics are those that I feel I put them in this category really because I feel some degree of bashfulness bringing them up. Or I feel like these are often the topics which, if they're going to dominate an episode, I feel a little bit of a need to kind of offer a disclaimer to say, hey, maybe don't start with this one. Sorry, we usually talk about other stuff. The special topics I put them in the terms that made the most sense to me at the time: religion/atheism, or God stuff, or not God stuff. Men and women, including marriage, I guess there, although marriage comes up in child rearing some as well. Men and women as a topic. So religion and atheism, men and women, chess. Oh man, does feel pretty embarrassing. But yeah, I sometimes talk about chess. The public conversation, which is not, I think that includes politics, but really I don't, as I've said before, like, I'm not really interested in talking about politics. I am sometimes interested in talking about how we, broadly speaking, as a culture, seem to be talking about something. Sometimes that'll be politics, sometimes it'll be the sexes, sometimes it'll be dicks, sometimes it'll be dicks. It really felt like it was like a true moment of the podcast, like, being fully coming into its own when I got, like, I had like a serious phone call with like a very smart, very serious poetry critic. Said, I got him on the phone and he said, yes, I wanted to speak to you about some things you said on the episode. I believe it was entitled "We All Have Dick Blood on Our Hands." Yes, we have we have the neck tattoo in place. So the specials are religion, atheism, men, women, chess, the public conversation, and movies. Movies, for whatever reason, is the topic I feel the most bashful about when it comes up on the show. I actually will tell you why. The reason is that, of course, movies are an art form, just as poetry and fiction are. But the reason I feel most bashful about movies is that there are so many podcasts about movies. And maybe like even a degree below that would be TV. And I really, for the most part, I mean, we have talked about TV on the show. I really try to avoid that. Just again, not because I don't enjoy TV. I enjoy movies. I enjoy TV a great deal. I'm aware of how thoroughly flooded the podcast world is with recaps and discussions of movies and TV shows. So I'm sure we will, it was not my idea to talk about the Dylan movie, but people seem to really enjoy that. I really enjoyed that conversation with Alice and Brian, and it's one of the reasons I'm glad that Alice finished up Poetry Says. And as I've told her, I want as much Alice as she feels like giving us. So I'm very glad to have her as part of SLEERICKETS. She's a pretty special part of it. She's importantly, among many other things, she's the other one who knows how to produce and edit. So my guess is like I may take some of my movie covering cues from her, because she also loves movies and loves talking about them. So I thought I would just hand you those categories, partly because I'm just curious if your impressions are similar. That the big mandate is poetry, with all of those subcategories: POBIZ, publishing, criticism, editing, the academy, writing life. The wheelhouse, the areas of interest, of familiarity, of comfort, the go-to non-poetry areas are fiction, child-rearing, psychology, and philosophy. And then the specials are religion, atheism, men, women, chess, public conversation, and movies. I don't know that this order even corresponds to like the frequency with which these topics come up on the show, but it corresponds at least to my degree of bashfulness. This is like because of my Catholic upbringing, I feel like every topic or activity in my life gets subjected to a shame Geiger counter. So, the crackling increases as we go down this list. But yeah, let me know what you think of that. Like, what if you think I've got my priorities straight, if you think I should reorder this list somehow, if you think I'm really fooling myself, if I think that at this point religion and atheism is not part of the mandate of the show. I don't know. As has often been remarked, we have a lot of Catholics here. I think I'm more sensitive to it because I'm a cradle Catholic. I'm a baptized Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I think like a Catholic. I am according to many standards Catholic. If it were other religions or other categories, you would just call me a Catholic and not even blink. But I don't believe in God, and so I think for that reason I'm a little more sensitive to it than some other people are. But yeah, I mean, welcome as always. Catholics are great. Christians are great. So long as you're willing to tolerate the neck tattoo and hear a lot of stuff you disagree with. All right, so there was one other thing I did in preparing this episode, and it's as I look through my notes, it's bonkers. It's crazy that I did this. It probably will not make a lot of sense to a lot of you, but it was worth doing from my perspective. It helped me. And maybe it will be clarifying for some of you, or again, maybe you can just correct me and tell me what I'm getting wrong. So apart from not wanting to do interviews, apart from not wanting to be respectable, not wanting to just do sighing, pleasant poetry readings, I wanted to have good conversations, but I really did not think very much until I'd been really making the show for a while about what that means exactly. I knew I wanted to talk about a third-party topic, but I didn't really give a lot of thought to what a conversation is until I noticed that some of the conversations I had seemed to go better than others, particularly when there were more than two people involved. And what I noticed was that it wasn't just some people had more chemistry than others. It wasn't just that some people were sort of more eloquent than others. That's certainly true. Some people were more comfortable than others. All of those things are true. Elijah and I are working on a thing, and we talked a little bit about the gift of the gab and what that means and what it doesn't mean. That's a real factor, but that's not really what I was noticing when some of these conversations just seemed to have a funny texture, funny pattern to them. What I decided to do was to make a taxonomy of conversations, like of types of conversation. I broke it up into two larger categories, and then one of those categories I broke up into a subcategory, and then I made a list of each of the types of conversation that falls into each of these categories and subcategories. So the two larger categories, two different types of conversation, were one-sided conversations and collaborative conversations. So one-sided conversations, this is if only one person is talking, but it really is intended for an audience. It is somebody speaking to another person, to a group of people. What I'm doing right now, this is a one-sided conversation. I think it was I want to say it was Kierkegaard who said, like, every effective sermon is a dialogue, even if even if one party never speaks up. But there are different things one can do when one is having a one-sided conversation. So I made my list of 6 different things I think one can do when having a one-sided conversation. And then I marked them. I actually have a little code of different types of bullet points I put next to them. And the code was a black circle for something that I wanted to avoid, like a filled-in black circle, a little dot, bullet point, an O, like a hollow circle for something I think will is definitely going to be a part of the show regardless, for good and probably for ill some, and then a star for things I positively actively want to include and cultivate. So in the black circle category for one-sided conversations were the 2 entries in the black circle subcategory are sermonizing, that is, speaking with the goal of imparting a moral conviction to the listener, teaching a lesson specifically of the moral variety. I really want to avoid that as much as possible. I'm sure I'm guilty of it sometimes, but really don't like that myself. Have very little tolerance for sermons, and don't have an interest in delivering them. That said, like, listening to sermons or homilies as a kid in Mass was a really rich early instruction in storytelling and in writing, because it involved thinking on multiple tiers of reality at the same time. So I loved the form of a lot of those sermons. I learned a lot about, like, story structure and presentation and form from sermons. I just don't want to do the sermonizing part. I don't want to teach people lessons. So that's one thing you can do in a one-sided conversation. The other one I really want to avoid is vamping or patter. Saying stuff to say stuff. Basically, I think there was a sociological study I've quoted on the show before that referred to placebo reasons, and vamping or patter is what I would call placebo speech. Saying stuff to say stuff. Stalling. Filling the air in a way that is pleasant, unobjectionable, maybe even won't prompt anybody to change the channel, to turn off the program, to hit pause, to hit skip, but isn't actually doing anything else except producing words. So I want to avoid vamping, want to avoid sermonizing. In the hollow circle category of three types of one-sided conversation that will inevitably, of course, continually appear on the show, to varying degrees with varying frequency, is riffing, talking about something, doing a bit about a topic, making a joke, playing off something that has just been said, spinning it out to see how far one can take it, telling jokes, making light of something. in order to be funny, in order to be entertaining, in order to get a rise out of people. That's certainly inevitably going to be part of the show. Likewise, ranting, another type of one-sided conversation. Giving vent to one's spleen about a given topic. And lecturing, which I distinguish from sermonizing. Lecturing, I almost gave a black circle. But I think probably, yeah, it will end up being part of this show some. Like lecturing, again, I want to use this like descriptively, not prescriptively. I don't mean this as a good or bad term. I mean it as a descriptive term. So if sermonizing is imparting a moral to the listener, a lecture is conveying knowledge or information to the listener. Versecraft is a lecture format. Like very occasionally, Elijah will do an interview, but for the most part, he prepares, he writes these out the way like an old-fashioned professor, like Ryan, by the way. Ryan, when he teaches a class, he writes out his lectures and he reads them to the class. These are well-crafted essays. That's what he posts on his Substack, right? Like Versecraft is a lecture format podcast. There's inevitably going to be some of that on this show when I learn about something and get excited and want to tell you about it, but I maybe want to. My instinct is to limit that. Again, maybe I'm wrong too. Maybe I should embrace that a little more. But my instinct is to say yes, that's always going to be part of the show. But maybe I don't want it to be too big a part. And then the category that I definitely actively want to include in the show as a one-sided form of conversation is storytelling. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. I feel like there's no human who doesn't like storytelling, doesn't like being told a good story. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I certainly hope the show always involves a little bit of storytelling. Okay, so that was one-sided forms of conversation. Now, collaborative conversations, this is a much bigger category. So collaborative conversations actively involving two or more people, whether this is a guest or co-host or multiple co-hosts with or without an additional guest. I divided collaborative conversations into two further subcategories. One is static and one is dynamic. So in a static collaborative conversation, words are said, but the status quo is unchanged. People say words to each other, but there's no real significant exchange of information, of ideas. There's no action performed one on the other. It's sort of like a sitcom. You come into the conversation in a state and you leave the conversation in the same state. And this is, like to varying degrees, some more strictly than others. But the static forms of conversation, again, this first one, you know what? I actually may just shift this. All right. I'm going to shift this to dynamic because I think I'm wrong about this first one. So I'm shifting it. All right. Cutting the first one. All right. So truly static conversation, collaborative conversations are reminiscing. This is the black circle, by the way. Reminiscing. Remember when? I wrote an essay some years ago about my friendship with Ryan Wilson, and I mentioned that I'd been at a funeral. It was a reception, and I can't remember if it was the reception or the wake, but I went to a big family gathering for a death and observed two men in their 60s talking to each other, and they'd been in high school together. They'd been best friends in high school, and they were still very fond of each other. But what sort of appalled me was listening to them talk. Their entire conversation was about high school. I sound like I sound like some kind of Grinch. Like I sound like Scrooge. But their whole conversation was about high school. They were in their 60s. And the impression I got, maybe wrongly, maybe this is just me being autistic, I don't know, but the impression I got was that they didn't have anything else to talk about. And that just sent a chill down my spine. you inevitably do a little bit of reminiscing with friends and loved ones and family. But boy, I have a real allergy to it. I think because it smells like death to me. So reminiscing, talking about the past, talking about shared past experiences. The lowest form of reminiscing, of course, is TV reminiscing. Remember that thing on The Simpsons when they said X? That's truly the lowest form of reminiscing. But yeah, reminiscing gets a black circle from me. Static collaborative conversation. Next is small talk, which I think is the collaborative version of placebo speech, right? The singular version is patter or vamping. The collaborative version is small talk. Saying words. It is important that you are saying words. It's important that you are saying the words demonstrates that you have whatever degree of acquaintanceship you are supposed to have. Hey, you're my neighbor. You live down the street. Yeah, I see your kids. Yep. Boy, we both have dogs. How's that tree? The deer come through this neighborhood sometimes. You wouldn't believe. Is your marriage still falling apart? Yeah, it's still falling apart. The words you say just to be saying words. I have been very bad at placebo speech, at small talk in the past, because I think because it feels too self-evidently like placebo speech to me, and so I'm liable to slip into actual nonsense, which it turns out people notice right away. When you just say nonsense words at them when they're doing small talk with you, they really notice right away that you're not even playing the game at all. So small talk, placebo speech, inevitably there's going to be some of that. Like you can't have a show with multiple hosts and not have some small talk just to grease the wheels, just to keep things moving. The last static collaborative conversational form that I wrote down was riffing, plural. There's singular riffing and there's plural riffing. But then I broke that into two subcategories. One's adversarial riffing, which is like deliberately playing up a minor conflict for laughs, which is like classic Brian, right? Giving me grief about whether or not there's a Voldemort-like smooth noseless surface in the middle of the face, or whether there's a gaping hole. Really dragging out the attempts to get Timothée Chalamet's speech to play, and so on. Adversarial riffing. There's cooperative riffing, where it's not adversarial. You're not playing up a conflict between the two. You are playing up a point of agreement. When there's blood in the water, when there's chum to the sharks, right? So when both Alice and I get excited about how weird choking is. By the way, most of the response I got from listeners about choking was choking is normal, actually. Weird, like, stop being weird, square old folks, Alice and Matthew. Choking is normal and fine. So, hey, thank you for letting me know. Choking is normal and fine, even if Alice and I had fun being horrified by it. So the category, though, that got me started on this whole process is this subcategory of a subcategory of a subcategory. So within the category of conversations, within the subcategory of collaborative conversations, within the subcategory of static collaborative conversations, within the subcategory of riffing, and even the subcategory of cooperative riffing, there is what I call consensus riffing. So consensus riffing is two or more people presuming a basic agreement about not just one small topic, but a whole perspective, a whole worldview, and riffing not just on an object perceived from that vantage point within that worldview, but riffing on the existence of that worldview and inevitably on the strangeness of other worldviews' existence. So like most political podcasts consist of consensus riffing, of a group of guys taking rebound shots off each other's observations about how crazy it is, how dumb the libs are, or how crazy the conservatives are. Right? Consensus riffing presumes a consensus, presumes a larger shared set of values, an agreed upon worldview, and riffs on the existence of that worldview and riffs on the implausibility or absurdity or disgustingness of other worldviews, of other points of view. You can hear people do a lot of consensus riffing on Israel, on Palestine, on Trump, on trans issues in every fucking direction. The conversations where people tend not to speak to anybody who disagrees with them are the conversations which consensus riffing happens the most. I have found myself in some conversations on this show when I realized the pattern of conversation that had been agreed upon was one of consensus riffing, and I am very bad at that. And I feel very ill at ease doing that. And so I will usually fuck up the vibe if I'm in the room. So I put a black circle on consensus riffing. The rest, collaborative riffing in general, adversarial or cooperative, I think all of that gets a hollow circle. It's all going to be stuff that will probably inevitably be part of the show, and some of that will be really fun. But my instinct is consensus riffing gets a black circle for me. Yeah, my gut is against it. But again, I would love to hear from all of you on as to what you think about that. How down the rabbit hole am I here? I didn't put a star by any of the static collaborative forms of conversation. Some are inevitable, some are really to be avoided, and some of the inevitable ones can be really fun. I mean, I listen to podcasts that consist of consensus riffing. Right? I don't generally share the consensus, or I don't wholly share it, but it can be that can be really funny. It can be really entertaining. I would have a very hard time participating in that. But so for SLEERICKETS, none of the static conversational forms stood out to me as being something I really actively wanted to cultivate. Among the dynamic collaborative conversational forms, there are, it's a slightly longer list. All right, so here's the list. It has more bad and more good in it. Number one is catching up. Hey, how have you been? How's your ankle doing? How's your psychopathic son doing? Catching up. Some time has passed. We know each other. Time has passed. You fill me in on what's happening in your life. I fill you in on what's happening in my life. That in itself is totally neutral, and it's also like nobody doesn't do some catching up. Although if you ask my wife, I do not nearly enough, because I will come home from having hung out with a friend for several hours, and she will ask the most basic question about what's been happening in his life, and I will have no idea because we never touched on it. But some catching up is inevitable, and it's just part of being a human being. It can. I put a black circle on catching up. I think there are cases when there's some ongoing specific wheelhouse related topic process that's happening. Like if Brian asks how our latest efforts to eradicate lice in our fucking house have been going, maybe that would be acceptable on the show. But my instinct is generally speaking that catching up is fine and is normal, but maybe isn't something for the podcast. Also black circle. I also put a black circle next to interview qua interview. One person merely interrogating another. I don't know. Maybe that shouldn't get a black circle. Maybe that should get a white circle, like a hollow circle, because there probably will be some of that. Probably that's just you know what that is? You know what I think it is? Here's what I think. I think I don't really want there to be any wholesale interviews on the show, but interviewing will probably inevitably be a pattern, a portion of a lot of conversations. And probably that's some of what I did with Brad. I mean, definitely it is, because he mentioned a crazy fact about his books, about his physical books as objects. It was, and so as soon as he asked that, then I had a lot of follow-up questions. So I guess for that part of the conversation, I was really interviewing him. But my hope is I don't want any start to finish interviews as interviews. I think I'm changing it. I'm making that a hollow circle. Interview is a hollow circle now. Another black circle, though, is adversarial debate. And I mean this pretty specifically. I don't mean conversation between people who disagree, because I definitely want conversations between people who disagree. I mean, I one of the pleasures of the show is collaborating with people I do disagree with. You know, I was listening to Versecraft today. Boy, like, I had the thought, like, man, if I was worried that Elijah would stop saying things I strongly disagree with, I didn't have to worry because he delivers. And that's great. Like, that's part of the fun of the whole thing. It gives us more to dig into. So I definitely want disagreement. But I think adversarial debate is what I think of as like debate club debate, where it's a contest. And there are two people and each one's trying to win. And the thing I think that really puts me off from debate, and it's the reason I don't really have any interest. I love arguing. I love disagreeing and digging in and thinking through things. But the thing that really puts me off debate is that one of the cardinal sins in a debate, like the thing you are not allowed to do in a debate, is learn. You're not allowed to learn anything. Like you can't have your perspective enlarged. It's not allowed. It violates the premise of the whole exchange. So I really don't want adversarial debate, strictly speaking. Though I do hope for lots of disagreement. We talked about interview already. The next hollow circle category is shop talk. And I mean like strict shop talk. Like this is sometimes when I will write to potential guests, I will say, you know, let's talk some shop and some shit. So shop talk, I mean, like, I'm talking about like really like technical discussion. Like I had a little exchange with Stallings when she was on the show about like what specifically is meant by the term doggerel, like in precise technical terms. So like exchanging and refining technical craft-based knowledge. That's shop talk. That definitely is going to be part of the show. It probably will never be like the main part of the show, but like, of course, shop talk is going to be part of the show. A salon or a symposium is another form of dynamic, collaborative conversation. That I'm identifying that as like, I'm thinking of the symposium like Plato Symposium. So this is a basically serial holding forth. One person delivers a spiel, and then the next person delivers a spiel, and then the next person, and then the next person. And they're good spiels, and maybe one of the spiels responds to another of the spiels, but they're sort of given in succession in sort of a long, uninterrupted presentational manner. Definitely going to be some of that on the show to varying degrees, for good and ill. I definitely think there's some limitations to that form of conversation. There's argumentation, which in parentheses for this I have Socratic dialogues in practice. Like when you actually read Socratic dialogues 9 times out of 10, what's happening is Socrates has a thing to say. And he takes up a conversation with some fool. I mean, you know, sometimes like a brilliant fool, but with some fool or some series of fools. And it's a dialogue. He's asking them questions. He's prompting them. They're supplying answers or red herrings or clay pigeons, and he's shooting them down, and he's responding, and he's taking them as prompts to elaborate on the point he's trying to make. Generally speaking, as a broad account, that's what's actually happening in most Socratic dialogues. And that's something that I think can be perfectly valuable. Somebody's got a point to make, and it actually is helpful for him to have a conversation in order to make his point. But it is, you know, you could even argue that that's verging on a one-sided form of conversation. Socratic dialogue in practice, argumentation, I called it. And then the last 3 I have stars by. And these are sort of the 3 I'm most interested in overall. Like I only put stars by 4 types of conversation. I expect the podcast to include a lot more. Some of those lot more can be really rich and wonderful, and I would never want to eliminate them. But like the 4 that I really definitely actively want to cultivate are 1, storytelling, and then the other 3 are collaborative and dynamic. Level seeking. And I mean this sort of specifically. What I don't necessarily mean is finding the lowest common denominator, right? well, we can all agree that Trump's an asshole, right? Like that's not what I'm looking for. I think it can be interesting when you have a complex subject and a bunch of people, or 2 people, 3 people, who don't agree, but who are not totally at odds. It actually can be interesting and worthwhile to try to work out what the nature of the agreement or disagreement is. It's sort of like finding an exchange rate. Like, what does it take? What's the mutatis mutandis between how you look at this and how I look at this? And I think a really, fascinating conversation I remember hearing once, and God only knows how accurate it is, but the observation was that when men have a conversation, they do so with the goal of one of them will win the conversation. I don't think that's true. I think it's sometimes true. I don't think it's true as a rule, but there's truth to it. There's truth to that. That men have a conversation with a goal that one of them will win. It's adversarial. It's competitive. It's confrontational. Whereas women have conversations with the goal of finding a consensus, finding something that they can all agree on. Sometimes that is the lowest common denominator. Sometimes that is, as simple as aren't children cute? To use a very stereotypical example. But this is in the spirit of that. Level seeking, I think, can be really valuable. There's certain things I'm never going to agree with Elijah about, but it can be interesting when we talk about something that we have, like talking with Cameron about Paradise Lost. That our actual disagreement on the book is relatively small. It's really more than that. It's a matter of emphasis. That he's simply more interested in certain things that I'm less interested in, and vice versa. So level seeking, I think, can be really useful, really valuable. Definitely always going to be a part of the show. And I want it to be. I think I am enriched by level seeking conversations, trying to figure out what precisely do we agree upon and what is the nature of the disagreement exactly. And then the next one is analysis. And I mean this, again, sort of nerdily specifically. Analysis is literally the loosening up of a knot, the untangling of it, the disentangling of a knot. So working with another person to pull apart what is happening, what is going on in this essay. Is there a better version of this argument that the author didn't quite settle upon? Really pulling the loose threads and trying to disentangle the knots and achieve some kind of clarity. And working with somebody to do that, not adversarially, not in an interview fashion, not taking turns presenting opinions, and not merely exchanging technical knowledge, but nor, I think the difference is level seeking, the emphasis is on the perspective. The emphasis is on, well, what do you think and what do I think, and what precisely is the difference between those two? Versus analysis is of a third-party subject. What is really going on in this game, in this movie, in this poem, in this argument? What is all of this? How can we best identify it in ways that will provide more rather than less clarity? And then the last category, and this is maybe I'm getting real woo-woo and mushy here, but the last category, there's storytelling, level seeking, analysis, and then the last one, this is so corny as I see it, I called this last category discovery. And the parenthetical is Socratic dialogues in theory. What Socrates says his dialogues are doing, though they seldom, if ever, actually do this, which is to say, two people are talking in pursuit of understanding, and they don't just exchange information or knowledge that they already have. They don't just identify what each other thinks and how those two thoughts can be understood in relationship to each other. They don't merely pull apart a third-party object. They pursue some new understanding some new goal, some new idea, some new possible answer. And by way of asking each other questions and producing examples, they maybe get closer to finding something out. That's so corny sounding now that I say it out loud. But that was my list. The one-sided conversations were vamping, sermonizing, riffing, ranting, lecturing, and storytelling. The collaborative, static conversations were reminiscing, small talk, and riffing, either adversarially, cooperatively, or within cooperative riffing, consensus riffing. The dynamic collaborative conversations were catching up, adversarial debate, interview, shop talk, symposium, argumentation, level seeking, analysis, and discovery. Man, what was this episode? The episode was supposed to be about what is this podcast, but the real question is, what the fuck have I been doing for the last hour and 15 minutes? I hope that if nothing else, you have some opinions about it. You have some opinions about things I should have gotten to, didn't get to, would have gotten to if I had spent less time worrying about types of conversation. Yeah, I thought I would just finish by sharing this very small, very nerdy discovery I made recently, which was there's a poem. I think I've read it before on the show, or at least referred to it, that I love of Robert Lowell's, which is called For John Berryman. He wrote a number of poems for John Berryman. This one is not included in his collected. I guess it didn't appear in any of his books, but it was published in the New York Review of Books for John Berryman. It was published in 1977. And then there's a parenthetical note after reading his last dream song. But there's a line in it that I remembered from the first time I ever heard it, because it was so biting and indelible, and I learned something about that line recently. So the line is, "Girls will not frighten the frost from the grave." So here's this poem for John Berryman by Robert Lowell after reading his last dream song. The last years we only met when you were on the road and lit up for reading your battering dream, audible, deaf, in another world then as now. I used to want to live to avoid your elegy. Yet really we had the same life, the generic one our generation offered, le maudit, the compliment each American generation pays itself in passing. First students, then with our own, our galaxy of grand maîtres, our 50s fellowships to Paris, Rome, and Florence, veterans of the Cold War, not the war, all the best of life, then daydreaming to drink at 6, waiting for the iced fire, even the feel of the frosted glass, like waiting for a girl, if you had waited. We asked to be obsessed with writing, and we were. Do you wake dazed like me and find your lost glasses in a shoe? Something so heavy lies on my heart. There, still here, the good days when we sat by a cold lake in Maine, talking about the winter's tale, Leontes' jealousy and Shakespeare's broken syntax. You got there first. Just the other day, I discovered how we differ. Humor. Even in this last dream song, to mock your cat-like flight from home and classes, to leap from the bridge. Girls will not frighten the frost from the grave. To my surprise, John, I pray to, not for you. Think of you, not myself. Smile and fall asleep. So, of course, he makes a number of allusions, to Shakespeare, to the French decadent poets, to various historical events, to Berryman's dream songs. In particular, something so heavy lies on my heart. There sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy. So I forget exactly the phrasing. But what I did not realize until just the other day is that girls will not frighten the frost from the grave, which is just such a perfect line. That's also an allusion. It's an allusion to a little tiny lyric by Ben Jonson. It's a song from one of his plays, from The Sad Shepherd. And in Joanna's book of the Cavalier Poets, it's the very last poem in Ben Jonson's selection. It's a young man singing about all the things he does not yet know. Most of the poem is about what he knows he doesn't know, but it ends on a declaration that Lowell, I think, disputes. All right, so this is, there's no title. It's just the first line by Ben Jonson. Though I am young and cannot tell either what death or love is well, yet I have heard they both bear darts, and both do aim at human hearts. And then again I have been told love wounds with heat, as death with cold, so that I fear they do but bring extremes to touch, and mean one thing. As in a ruin we it call one thing to be blown up or fall, or to our end like way may have by a flash of lightning or a wave. So love's inflamed shaft or hand may kill as soon as death's cold hand, except love's fires the virtue have to fright the frost out of the grave. But the shepherd was wrong. Girls will not frighten the frost from the grave. All right, you can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. You can also sign up for the secret show. Put it in your email address, and I'll give you a week's access for free. After that, it's pretty fucking cheap. You'll have access to 150 soon shows up there. Some of them continuations from the main feed. A lot of them weird little standalones, like the last one, and like this next one, I believe. I think I'm going to be talking about Frankenstein. Again, wheelhouse, not mandate. But please let me know what you thought about, to what extent do I have podcast dysmorphia? Let me know what this thing is. What is this thing we have made? What hath pod wrought? All right. Thank you for listening. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.